Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, LOAU University. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Joe Perez from the A4LM Advanced Concepts team and partnered today with Capt Sophia Rizzo from the A4L TESSARACT team. I most recently commanded the 718th Aircraft Maintenance Squadron at Kadena Air Base, where we spent 18 months refining, installing, and advancing and sustaining our theory of constraints journey and our production strategy to deliver quality of life for maintainers on the ground and weapon system availability and execute the mission out in the Pacific. Well, my goal today is to share some experience, some insight, and a formula for sowing the seeds of change in your organization, as well as using theory of constraints to set a foundation for your production strategies. So if you were asked today what your production strategy is, from the flight line to the back shop to the IDRC to civil engineering processes, how do you explain it? If the CEO came to you and said, Joe, I need to understand how it is that we're completing our processes. What is your strategy for accomplishing all of the work that we've got? What is your strategy for ensuring we don't bust our overtime? If that sounds familiar, it's the problems we face every day. It's the challenges that we fight, that we work through to deliver on airmen's quality of life, to deliver on our business bottom line, and in our service, wearing the uniform, to provide mission capability, to provide weapon system availability, to execute the mission no matter what part of the world you're in. So how do you explain it? Are you able to capture that concisely where it can be understood from the lowest ranking airman to the highest ranking wing commander?
Hey everyone, it's Sophie. Sometimes innovation comes in the form of simply conducting our operations a little differently. Process or policy improvements can help us unlock capacity by testing out new techniques, tactics, or procedures that challenge the status quo. We're going to explore one of those process innovations with you today. So, what is the goal of your organization? That seems like a basic question, but could you describe it down to one or two lines for your team to focus on? You may say, I have a mission, a vision, or a priority, but have you ever tried to distill your operations down to the single most important thing you need to do on a daily basis? We have found through a lot of implementations of TOC that describing the goal is a lot easier said than done. But if your organization does not have a clear picture on the single most important goal, how do they focus and finish on accomplishing it? We cannot afford to waste our airmen's time, our resources, or our limited weapon system availability. So how might we laser focus our resources where they're needed the most to advance our readiness? And what prevents you from meeting your goal? When you know the true goal of your organization, you can start identifying what's preventing you from meeting it. Now, I know some of you have heard the phrases maintenance death spiral, putting out fires, vicious cycle. Let's explore these concepts a little more. Have you considered that in your organization, in the system you operate in, that disruptions in flow, constant thrash, and never-ending firefighting could be caused by the way the team is reacting to natural delays? Let's take a look at this diagram. In all of our organizations, we have deadlines, ETICs, deliveries, or suspenses. Frequently, those deadlines make us start work all at once as soon as possible, causing work to pile up and build a queue waiting for resources. When this happens, we juggle priorities, multitask, and spread resources thin. And when we do this, tasks take longer and the productivity of our work decreases, ultimately causing missed commitments or delays and putting us right back into this constant vicious cycle. Does this sound familiar to you? Let's take a look at some vicious cycles we've seen recently in maintenance and logistics. This vicious cycle is from a fighter generation squadron. The team had a high ops tempo and limited proficient manning capacity. This fed into extended downtimes and increased delays, and these delays caused the team to minimize bundling scheduled maintenance, defer delayed discrepancies or partially mission-capable work, and prioritize certain aircraft and move the best resources to those priorities. They also had pressure from their future flying schedule and looming key performance metrics. This caused pressure for the team to start everything as soon as possible, and you can see these undesirable effects building upon each other, causing pressure to work more and more aircraft, spreading resources thin, multitasking, and driving this unit into a vicious cycle. Sound familiar? Although in these examples, we may not have been describing your operations to a T, you likely could identify similar undesirable effects in your organization.
So if the scenarios that Captain Rizzo talked about sound familiar, it's because we face these challenges every single day. Our production goals are high, our overtime is up, our quality of life is demanding. We want to give back to our airmen. No matter what you do, from generating aircraft on the flight line, to processing cargo, to processing personnel, they're all rooted in process management. And often we find ourselves in that competition between resources and people, and we tend to hit the easy button. A lot of times we hit the easy button, and that easy button turns into time. We take time from our airmen. But what if there was another option? What if there was another choice? What if there was another way to reframe the problem?
TOC enables highly variable organizations to find, focus, and resolve the most important issues facing the organization's goals. Its framework helps us break those vicious cycles and improve the flow of our organizations. TOC states that every organization is a system, and in a system, you're only as strong as your weakest link. TOC outlines 5 focusing steps for us to manage that weakest link, otherwise known as the constraint. Step 1 is identify your constraint. This is critical because as managers and leaders, we know we have limited bandwidth. When you know where the true constraint lies, the rest becomes distractions and noise. You can start focusing on the constraint. Now, the word constraint can sometimes have a negative connotation, but once you know your constraint, it becomes very obviously simple that you need to maximize the output and the capacity from that constraint. That brings us to step 2, exploit the constraint. And the idea behind exploitation is to make sure the constraint is always productive. Productive meaning you're not spreading that constraint thin, you're not wasting its capacity, you're not having it do non-valued work. It's following the right priorities at the right time. It's focused on meeting the goal. Exploitation means ensuring you get the maximum out of your constraint, whatever that might be. Step 3 is to subordinate everyone and everything else to the constraint. This is a relatively straightforward step. You keep the constraint working, you get the rest of the organization to make sure they are feeding the right work to the constraint. And if you are on the receiving end of the constraint's work, then your job is to make sure whatever the constraint produces is actually turned into throughput. So, subordinating everything to the constraint is perhaps the most important step because it involves the alignment of everyone to the overall goal of the organization. Now, once you have done all of this, your organization should be operating at a high level of performance. However, that may not be enough because the goal can change and you're always striving for bigger and better things. So, if you want to further improve the performance, now it's time for step 4, elevate the constraint. This is applying key performance indicators, software or tools, or even investing money into the constraint. People tend to make the mistake of jumping very quickly to alleviating the constraint with extra time of our airmen in the form of 12-hour shifts, throwing money at the fanciest tools or equipment, or trying to solve a process issue with a software solution, when they simply may not be using existing capacity well. But if an organization fully embraces steps 1 through 3, at step 4, you elevate the constraint to get extra assistance. Finally, step 5, don't let inertia stop you. Go back to step 1, identify the next constraint. Laying out these 5 focusing steps just scratches the surface of the tools that TOC provides to conduct root cause analysis, resolve core conflicts, and break that vicious cycle. If you've been experimenting or implementing with TOC, you've heard terms like bundling, full kitting, work in process or WIP, Little's Law, critical path, and at the end of this session, we'll provide you tons of tools that you have at your disposal to get started. At TESSARACT, our 3-pronged strategy for making TOC principles just the way we do business is to stack hands with our contracted and airman partners to continue to generate and deliver readiness returning results. We are collecting the best practices, lessons learned, and case studies of how TOC is being implemented across our enterprise to continue to communicate and share these results with each other and each of you. And finally, we will institutionalize these results by partnering with our friends in Force Development and the Air Force Institute of Technology to continue to teach TOC principles in multiple areas of enlisted and officer education. But you still may be a little skeptical. So let's explore how Lieutenant Colonel Perez and his team built the foundation to reshape their production approach and culture.
So what you're about to see is an approach. It is my take or our take in the squadron to installing theory of constraints and setting a foundation for our culture change to support this change, support our strategy to deliver on our promise to our airmen, to deliver on our production goals within the unit. Now, every day started off with understanding where we were and where we wanted to go, both organizationally as a culture, as well as tactically in our production strategy and in each specific MDS. The key players that were involved in the 3-day workshop were the DO, the squadron superintendent, company grade officers, chiefs, senior enlisted, and key members of the key leverage point, really, inside the production office. Within each of the 3 days, we had a goal, we had a plan, and an objective for what we were going to accomplish by the end of the day. For day 1, it was installing a foundation of theory of constraints to build a common language and concepts, terminologies, and ideas that everyone could speak universally, from the key leaders down to the airmen turning wrenches on the fly line. Day 2 transitions from ethereal concepts to real-life application. We took the simulations and overlaid them onto practices, from the flight line to the IDRC to personnel processing to cargo processing to workforce management. We saw them come to life and transition from something that was a nebulous concept into something that we could touch. Additionally, we focused our day and started our day with understanding that culture change comes from consistency in action. To achieve the change that we're after, we have to repeatedly apply the principles that we are talking about, consistently apply and deliver on the actions that we set forward. The success of any production strategy needs to be paired with a culture and a foundation that supports the success. An environment that nurtures our progress towards our goal, both organizationally and tactically when it comes to our production. We continued on with linking our strategy and our implementation of theory constraints to higher headquarters strategy. And once again, our LNO stepped in to provide that insight in how we fed to headquarters Air Force, to actions by TESSARACT, and the events led across the Air Force, across the country, across the globe. Lastly, our final day was spent putting that pen to paper, identifying our constraints, prioritizing our actions, setting our business rules up, and being able to explain that strategy clearly up and down the chain of command and across to our teammates that are involved in our production and tactical goals. It's important to note that the execution of your strategy is a journey. I can guarantee you that you're not going to get it right the first time. I can guarantee you that you might have to check the map and see where you've gone off the rails, perhaps gotten off the beaten path. There might be some course correction needed, and that course correction could come from all angles, from teammates, from your units, from your senior leadership. Take it as an opportunity to always adjust. Continually refine your goals, continually refine your approach, but remain consistent in your action. Continue to repeat your application and solidify that change in culture using theory of constraints to support it. And as we talked about at the beginning with the case studies, use this strategy to communicate. Use it to communicate to your senior leaders all the way down to your youngest airmen. They're all craving, wanting to know what the roadmap is. How are you going to lead them to success? How are you going to lead them to a better quality of life? And this strategy and this approach provides a tool and a methodology for coming up with your own approach to it. So what now? You've come to the end of your 3-day workshop. What do? First and foremost, write down your plan. It could take the shape of a PowerPoint, a Word document, an Excel product, even a draft email, but write it down. Share this plan. Share the roadmap with your team, with your airmen, with your peers, with the organizations that are going to help you achieve your goal, no matter where you are. Secondly, build a common language. Continually take the opportunity to educate, train, reinforce, and support the foundation that is holding up your strategy. That theory of constraints, terminology, ideas, and concepts will soon perish. And it will perish based off of PCSs, TDYs, retirements. You must continually work to build and reinforce that foundation that'll progress your strategy. Third, empower your leverage points. The senior NCOs, chiefs, junior officers that are in your team are the key decision makers. For a maintenance unit, that leverage point is the production team. They're the heart and soul of the production execution and are making decisions every day that are critical to your implementation of theory constraints and the success of your strategy. Give them the tools that they need, empower them, trust them to go forth and make a difference in your unit. Lastly, embrace the healthy skepticism. At every turn, there will be no shortage of leaders, of teammates that are skeptical about your approach, that are unsure that this thing is going to work. But take every opportunity as an opportunity and a chance to reinforce your ideas, to reinforce the concepts of theory of constraints, to build that trust and share that roadmap to achieve your production goals, your unit change that you're after. Thank you to LOAU University for the opportunity to share this approach and to share it with you. Thank you to TESSARACT for the partnership in putting this together. And lastly, thank you to the airmen on the front line who are taking the actions and making theory constraints and making our production a reality for the United States Air Force.
Hey, this is Matt from TESSARACT Podcast. For more information on TOC, make sure to follow us on our social media pages, especially our LinkedIn, and check out our Evolve page with Theory of Constraints resources, where you're going to find our playbooks and other videos as well. Also, make sure to check out AFIT and their classes that they offer. They have TOC Fundamentals, 101, and 201 courses that you can take remotely. So make sure you and your team takes advantage of that education opportunity.